We will be recording the talk tonight, and the recording will be posted on our YouTube channel, Sourland Conservancy. So, if for some reason you need to leave a little early or you want to send this talk to your friend, you will be getting the link to that, and you can always look it up on our YouTube channel. What do you think, Bev? Should we begin in maybe 1 minute? Just let a couple people come in. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Okay, it's 7:01. It just turned to 7:02. Let's give it to 7:03 and then we'll start.
Okay. Thank you all for joining tonight. If you're just joining us, feel free to fill out the poll and let us know how you heard about the talk. Thank you so much for coming. We're very excited to have Juanita here.
All right. So great to see dozens of people on here. This is terrific. All right. 7:03. It's 7:03. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody. I am Beverly Mills, and I represent the Sourland Conservancy. I'm a trustee. I'd like to welcome you tonight to our presentation by Juanita Hummel on the topic of the ABCs of identifying our own backyard birds. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. We have so far more than 60 people on this Zoom call, and additional people I think will be jumping in as we go forward. Our meeting technical host is Maya Robles of our terrific Sourland Conservancy staff. Thank you. And she has the audio of everyone muted while we all listen to the talk, so there won't be any distractions. I believe you're all free to turn on or off your own video. Our speaker will be presenting slides and materials for about an hour, and after that we'll have a brief question and answer period. If you'd like to answer a question later, please type it into the chat bar and we will get to those questions. Thank you so much for that. Finally, this talk is being recorded so that we can offer it to others on our website, our YouTube channel. So please go ahead and recommend it to your friends. So I'd like to introduce our wonderful speaker, one of our most popular speakers, Juanita Hummel, what a wonderful friend to the Sourland Conservancy. Juanita Hummel has been a Sourland Mountain resident for 37 years and an avid birder for longer than that. After retiring from a career as a lab scientist, Juanita headed outdoors to the natural world to learn more about birds, plants, butterflies, and amphibians, and the habitats in which they live. She is currently president of the Washington Crossing Audubon Society. She's a Pennsylvania Master Naturalist. She's a volunteer naturalist at Bowman's Hill Wildflower Preserve, and she's participated in many citizen science projects. Speaking of that, she'll be telling us all how to be citizen scientists and participate in the Great Backyard Bird Count, which is coming up next week. Juanita enjoys eco-traveling to observe birds and plants in their native habitats around the world. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful speaker tonight, Juanita Hummel.
Thank you so much, Beverly, for that wonderful introduction. Tonight, we've got a lot to cover. We're going to focus on how to identify birds in your backyard. A lot of people got their start as birders developed their interest in birds by looking at birds at their backyard feeders, and they started wondering what they were. And some of them took it a little bit farther and tried to learn their names. For some people, that has been a difficult task. And so this was actually a keystone project that I did to get my Pennsylvania Master Naturalist certification. I wanted to narrow the focus so that it was easier for people to learn their own backyard birds relatively quickly. So that's what's going to happen tonight. You'll all come out of here semi-experts in birds of the Sourlands at feeders in the winter. So we're going to focus mostly on how to identify them. I'm going to speak a little bit about how to feed them, but I'll point you to some other resources where you can dig deeper into that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to share those bird IDs that you've made lists of at your backyard feeders with the rest of the world through citizen science, through the Great Backyard Bird Count, which is a very exciting thing that gets bigger and bigger every year, and you can be part of it if you know what birds you're looking at in your yard. So let's get started. There's quite a lot. There are so many birds. This is part of the problem. People look at birds at their feeders, they go out and buy a field guide and see something like this. This is all the birds you can see in North America, but it's only the males for the most part, because those are the most colorful and that's what people paint. And if you add all the females, who sometimes look very different from the males, and put those on this poster, and then the juveniles, which might look different from either of their parents, you wouldn't even be able to distinguish an individual bird on a poster like this. That's way too many birds. So what actually determines what species of birds you will see is where you're located, north, south, east, west. What kind of a habitat type you're in. Is it a forest, a desert, or are you at the shore? And what season you're in, because the birds change with every season. And this is the first in a series. We're focusing on the winter because that's actually the easiest time to start identifying birds, because more birds come to your feeder in the winter. And so you're going to have an easier time developing a little bit of confidence that the birds you think are what you think they are, hopefully. So narrowing the focus from the 10,000 plus species that can be found in the world at large to the 1,000 plus species in North America. Even in New Jersey alone, there are more than 480 species of birds. So if you buy a Birds of New Jersey, that's going to be way too many birds to learn all at one time. Even my yard list in the Sourland, since we're the Sourland forest and the surrounding grasslands and the valleys on either side are a continentally important bird area. There are a lot of birds to be seen here, so that 145 species is too many also. So I figured that narrowing it down to about the 40 species that visit backyard feeders in the Sourlands in winter is a perfect place to start. But that's still a lot of birds, so I'll move right into it. So this is mostly to illustrate that if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. So these are the birds that are most likely to be at your feeders in the Sourlands in winter. And some of these, a lot of these are, you can see year round. So they're here. The ones in blue, type here, are ones that are only here in the winter. And then there are birds that are less common at feeders. That doesn't mean they're less common in the Sourlands. We have lots of pileated woodpeckers and flickers, but they don't typically come to feeders except under specific circumstances, and we'll be discussing all these birds as well. Again, the ones in blue are the ones that only come here in the winter. They live in the north, they breed in the north, and they come south for the winter. They actually consider New Jersey south in the winter. And right now, purple finches are not seen every year, but right now I've got a flock of about 25 or 30 of them in my backyard feeders. They've been around for several weeks, and I imagine quite a few of you do have purple finches too. It's just a matter of whether you recognize them for what they are, so we'll find out tonight. And finally, uncommon birds, they can still be seen. Common red-polled pine siskin and red-breasted nuthatch come down during what we call eruption years. That's spelled with an I, not an E. It is sort of like a volcanic eruption, because if you get an eruption of pine siskins, they can come flowing down by the hundreds of thousands from the north into New Jersey and into our area. So eruptions, when we're speaking of birds, refers to the movement of species that would normally spend the winter in the north, but have to move south in order to find enough food during the winter. All right, so this is a great way to know what to look at on a bird. You know, people will sometimes send me email, well, it was yellow and it had a little black on it and it was, you know, and they tell me all sorts of things. Sometimes I can figure out what it is, but sometimes I can't because they haven't been looking at the right part of the bird. So this is the What Feathers Tell Us system. This was invented by the McGill University Bird Observatory up in Montreal. And the wings, the W stands for wings, and what you're going to be looking at on the wings are the bars on the wings. This surprisingly can help you differentiate between similar looking birds in many instances. Not so much in winter birds, but when we get into spring birds, when we're looking at birds like flycatchers and things like that, these can be critical to making a correct identification. Next, the face. And what you're looking for on the face is the eye. Is there a line through the eye? Does the bird have what looks like an eyebrow? Is there a ring around the eye? And the beak can tell you a lot too. What is the shape of the beak and what is the size of the beak? And we'll illustrate all of these things going forward. And the T stands for tail. Is the tail cocked? Does the bird go around with its tail stuck up in the air a lot? Does it waggle its tail a lot? Does the tail have a special color or pattern? And this undertail, I'll put that in brackets because this is not terribly important for the winter birds we're going to be discussing tonight, but it can be another thing that's critical when you're looking at fall migrants. This is part of a series, so we're doing the winter birds first. I'm going to be doing a spring series, and I will do a late summer series, and possibly also a fall migration series, and I'll probably run out of energy. But I'll do my best to get those 4 series in, and hopefully we'll get some field trips to go with those series as well. So we'll actually get out in the field and have a look at these birds at some point. So you can just look at the W, F, and T, and if there are no children around, you could do WTF if that's easier to remember, but whatever works, I'm okay with that. Put a little notebook by wherever it is that you look at birds, out your window or whatever. If you find something you cannot identify, just make a note of what's going on in the wings, what's going on with the face, what's going on with the tail. And then when you go to your field guide later on, or you send me a question, for example, we'll have a much better chance of figuring out what it actually is. So let's have a look at this bird. Everybody knows this bird. This is the blue jay. We only have one jay in this part of the country, the blue jay. And it is big, loud, and unmistakable, but it's a good example of, this is what's called an all-purpose beak. It's sort of not too thin, not too thick, not too broad. It's a little bit pointy at the end. This is a bird, you can tell right away that this is a bird that eats different types of things. So the blue jay's favorite food is acorns. It can pick them up in that big beak of its, and it can hatchet them open with that beak and take out the insides. But the blue jay eats lots of seeds, but it also eats meat. People don't necessarily know this, but the blue jay will steal eggs from other birds' nests, and it will also take nestlings from other birds' nests and pick those nestlings apart and feed them to its own baby birds. But that's Mother Nature's plan for the blue jay. Whoops, I think we missed a bird in the middle there. Okay, here's a bird where both the face and the tail mean something. If you see a little bird with its tail cocked up like this, most of the time it's almost certainly a wren. And in our area in the winter, the only wren that has a white eyebrow is the Carolina wren. In fact, that's the only wren that ever has a white eyebrow. There's one that comes here in the winter called a winter wren, no white eyebrow. And there's a bird in the summer called the house wren that looks very similar but does not have the white eyebrow. So that is the bird. This is here year round. One thing I've noticed is that when this bird is singing, it keeps its tail tucked under itself like this. In fact, all the wrens I've ever looked at singing tend to keep their tails down when they're singing and stuck straight up in the air the rest of the time. Don't know why that is. Look at the beak on this bird. This is an insect eater. Whoops, oh dear me, get back there. This is an insect eater, long thin bill, and as with many insect eaters, it also likes to eat suet. It needs high fat foods. to survive the winter. Here's another bird that everybody should recognize, the beautiful northern cardinal. This is the male here. The female looks a lot like the male, but has much more brownish, does have some red colors in the tail. This is a seed eater beak, and this is a bird that takes seeds into its beak and manipulates them with that beak to take the husks off them. So that's a classic seed eater beak. It's short and very triangular. The base is very broad. And this one eats all kinds of sunflower seeds, and as far as I know, doesn't eat other birds' nestlings. This is a tufted titmouse. A lot of you will know this one too. This is a year-round resident. This bird also has an all-purpose beak. It's much smaller than the blue jays. It's unmistakable with its tuft, grayish bird. It's the only titmouse we have in this area. There are some in other parts of the country, but this is the only one you'll find in the Northeast. Another year-round bird. This one likes sunflower seeds. It will also take peanuts in the shell. It kind of pokes a hole in them and picks them up and flies off with them. And it also likes suet. This is a bird that will occasionally eat meat. I didn't know this until I came across one eating a mouse in the Mount Rose Preserve. It was actually eating the mouse. It was winter. It wasn't taking fur off for a nest. It was definitely eating the mouse. And I discovered later when I researched that they will sometimes go to carrion and help themselves to a little meat meal. Little extra protein, I guess. The chickadees of the Sourland Mountain region are interesting because they could be black-capped, especially in the winter. Some black-capped there was a time when the Sourland Mountains had only black-capped chickadees. That is changing because of climate change. So now we can see genuine black-capped chickadees in the winter. We could see Carolina chickadees, but many of the chickadees we see now are actually hybrids, and it's very hard to tell them apart. The hybrids typically do have white outer tail feathers similar to the black-capped chickadees. That doesn't help you in the winter, though. Might help you a bit in the summer to determine whether it's a hybrid. But it's extremely difficult because the hybrids can be almost the same size as a Carolina or almost the same size as the black-capped chickadee. Sorry about that. I keep poking that over there. If you're going to be reporting these birds on eBird or for the Great Backyard Bird Count, you should not try to identify them until you become much more expert at bird identification. Don't report them as either a black-capped or a Carolina unless you're absolutely certain that's what they are. And if you're a beginning birder, you will not be that certain until you've seen a lot more of each species. So, and even I have trouble telling them apart, especially if I'm seeing them from a distance. So you will report them as a chickadee species or black-capped Carolina species. You'll see both of these little boxes on different bird lists that you can check off. And here's what's going on. This is climate change at work. You can see this yellow line here is the intergrade zone where the Carolina chickadees meet the black-capped chickadees. And up here in New Jersey, we're right in the middle of that area. This map was made in 2014 by Cornell Labs, and at that point they found that between 2004 and 2014, the zone had shifted 7 miles northwards. Since then, that northwards, particularly of the northern boundary of that zone, it has increased in, so it's now moving northwards at a faster rate. And there are actually some models which show that within about 50 years or so, we're not going to have any black-capped chickadees left, in the United States. They're going to all be pushed farther north. So see them while you can. Go up to North Jersey where there's still, and also at Sandy Hook, New Jersey, you'll still find black-caps there. But it's only a matter of time before it becomes too warm for them and the Carolina chickadees are able to push further north. Also, the Carolina females have a preference for the bigger, more handsome black-capped chickadees. So their own Carolina males are at a disadvantage when there are these bigger, brawnier black-capped chickadees in the neighborhood. Here's a related species that you've probably all seen. These are the birds, this is a white-breasted nuthatch, and this is a bird that likes to head up to the middle of a tree and work its way down. They love being upside down. During the winter, we could have red-breasted chickadees coming down in certain years, again, because there's not enough food in the north. They are pretty clearly different. They have greater or lesser amounts of the red in their breasts, but they do have a very different pattern on the head. They're striped with black line through the eye and a white line above that, sort of like an eyebrow, except it goes all the way down the back of the neck. This is one that landed on my suet feeder, and when it landed, it was right side up, but within a few seconds it had turned upside down and was eating suet in the typical upside down position. So this is a white-breasted nuthatch, solid black head. And that's what you're most likely to see, but you could see one of these too. Oops, and this is skipping for some reason. This is a brown creeper. This is one of my favorite birds. It's a little small, inconspicuous bird. It has a long bill. I don't know if you can see that under the thing at the top, but it does have a long, slim bill. It's an insect eater, and it normally starts at the bottom of a tree and goes up, foraging for insects in the bark of the tree, and they love suet. And so if you want to get one of these, and I've only ever seen them in my yard on this one suet block that's attached to a tree. But they do love it. They probably found it when they came up from the bottom. I've had as many as 3 at a time, which caused me to be flagged on eBird. In other words, that when you're flagged, that can be either, oh no, did I make a mistake? Or it can be, ha ha, I found something unusual. And having 3 brown creepers at a time got me flagged on eBird. But we have perfect habitat for brown creepers. They're usually pretty solitary, but if there's plenty to eat and plenty of trees for them to scour around through, which there are in the Sourlands, at least until our ash trees all die, then you can have them in multiples. And this one disappears in the summer, goes farther north. They do breed up in the Delaware Water Gap area in New Jersey and then north of there. This is another common sight. You could have mourning doves. Mourning doves all look the same. They have no wing bars. They have little tiny beaks because they eat little tiny seeds. They have a crop like a chicken. So they swallow a whole bunch of seeds. Sorry about this. No. I don't know why this is doing it. Okay. And then they will sit there either nestled into some leaves in the sun or on a branch and digest what is in their crop. So sometimes you'll see them with a big bulge under the neck here. They don't have a tumor. They've just eaten a lot of seeds and now they're digesting them. If you live on a farm or if you live in a city or a more urbanized area, you may see rock pigeons. These are the imports from Europe. They typically come in different colors. They might have wing bars. And they have a red eye. So if you're not certain whether you're seeing a dove or a pigeon, the pigeon's color of the eyes will nail that ID for you. A lot of you have seen these little striped woodpeckers. Most of the time you're seeing the downy woodpecker because that can live in fairly small acreages of woodlands. But in the Sourlands, particularly in the forested part of the Sourlands, we have a lot of hairy woodpeckers. They are bigger than the downy woodpecker, but size it can be kind of deceptive, especially if at a distance. So there's another way to distinguish the downy from the hairy. They look almost identical in appearance. One is just larger, but the hairy woodpecker also has a longer beak. So the one way to determine is to look at the beak. The base of the beak goes here. It's behind these little white fuzzy feathers that are on the beak. From there, to the tip of the beak, it's about the same distance as the base of the beak to the back of the head of the hairy woodpecker. Whereas the downy woodpecker has a much smaller beak, and from the base to the tip is about halfway to the back of the head. And this usually will be pretty obvious when you're looking at the bird. In addition, the downy woodpeckers on the East Coast or in the eastern part of the country, have a barring on the white undertails, and this appears as spots like you can see here. So if you can get a look at the tail and you see these little spots down the sides, that is a downy for sure. The hairy just has plain white under feathers like this. And you may notice that these birds have a red spot on the back of their heads, and that red spot indicates a male. Now, if you happen to see these birds from the back, as you often do when they're working on a tree, David Sibley has noticed that the hairy woodpecker male most often has a black line through that red mark, whereas the downy woodpecker male does not. Unfortunately, this only works for the males. It doesn't work for the females. But this is a good indicator that it's a hairy woodpecker that you're looking at instead of a downy. Now this is the one everybody calls it. I saw a red-headed woodpecker. This is not a red-headed woodpecker. This is the red-headed woodpecker over here. It has a completely red head. And the rest of the feathers are either black or white. And when you see it flying, it very clearly shows the black and white feathers. This bird is rather rare, even in the Sourlands, but it definitely has been known to breed here and in the surrounding areas, so it is possible to see this bird. Just you're more likely to see this one, the red-bellied woodpecker. The male has red going from the base of the bill all the way down the nape of the neck, and that did it again, didn't it? And the female is red only down the back half of her head, or basically on the nape. Where is the red belly, you may ask? Well, the red-bellied woodpecker was identified from specimens that had been shot and stuffed and placed in a specimen drawer in a museum. And they always seem to lie them down on their back. So if you look very carefully, not in this picture, in some birds it's very difficult to see. They have maybe 2 or 3 little red feathers in the area where a navel would be if birds had navels, which they don't, but that in approximately that area. And usually you don't even see that because they're usually up against something like a tree or a feeder. Unless they're flying straight at you, and then you might get a glimpse of the red-bellied woodpecker. So this is a poorly named bird for somebody who's trying to learn bird IDs for the first time. But now you know. Northern flicker is a pretty common bird in the Sourlands, but it doesn't often come to feeders. It seems to prefer ants, but you will occasionally see it at a suet feeder like this one here. It has a bib, and it's very spotty in the front. And another name for this is the yellow-shafted flicker. That was an old name for it, and you can see why. When the bird spreads its wings out, it has a golden bronzy, those actually are the shafts of the feathers. They're golden bronzy looking. You can see this even when it's flying. It's unmistakable if you see it in flight. And you can tell the males from the females because the male has a black mustache or whisker, whatever you want to call it. It comes from just about the nose, like a very long mustache. So that's a good identification if you want to tell the male from the female. Yellow-bellied sapsucker. This is a pretty cool bird too. This one is the only migratory woodpecker. So almost all of the yellow-bellied sapsuckers that we see have come down from the northern parts of the United States, and virtually all, I believe, of Canada's yellow-bellied sapsucker population moves south to the United States in the winter. And some of them go really far south. I've seen some of these birds in Cuba even. The yellow-bellied sapsucker looks different. When you see it on a tree, it's going to look different. The throat is red on the male. The female has just the red head, no red throat. And their appearance looks a lot like lichen. They also do tend to spend a lot of time not moving on trees. They will just eat and then they will just stay on the tree, not moving, sometimes for an hour at a time. And so I guess if you look kind of like lichen, that's an advantage in staying camouflaged, especially if you live most of your time and you're a very vulnerable breeding times in the north, where there are lots of trees with lichen on them. And we do have quite a few here this year. We don't see them often. They do turn up at suet. If they're going to be anywhere, they're going to be in the suet feeders. But you may see them just flying around your yard too. They are attracted by the sounds of other birds at feeders. This is one that we all know. We're very lucky in the Sourlands to have lots of pileated woodpeckers. Sadly, I don't know if all of you know, probably all of you or a lot of you have heard about the fact that ash trees are being killed in large numbers in the Sourlands by the emerald ash borer. And these woodpeckers are really benefiting from that because they like to eat ants. They go into carpenter ants' nests, and they also eat wood borer larvae. So, and other things that move into trees after they've died. But unfortunately, birds like this are going to have a hard time if too much of the canopy dies off. So while they're doing okay now, if things continue to go the way they are, and we do lose 20% or more of our canopy trees because of the ash dieback, we may start losing some of these woodpeckers. Now, when I hear about it, every so often somebody will send me a picture of this giant woodpecker on a suet feeder. And when that's very unusual. And when I hear that, I usually ask them if there's been some building in the area recently. Has somebody been cutting wood? Because it's usually an indication that the bird is not finding enough food in its usual sources. So if you start seeing these woodpeckers appearing at your suet feeders, that will be probably not a very good sign. I'm just hoping it doesn't happen. I've never seen one at my suet feeders. I see them in the yard on the dead and dying trees, but I've never seen one at my suet feeder. Other people who have, when I've asked them if a friend of ours moved to North Carolina after he retired, moved into a brand new community, and one of the first birds he saw when he put up the feeders was a pileated woodpecker. And I said, they cut down the woods, didn't they, to build your housing development? And he said, yes, they did. And so they probably cut down this bird's house to put up human houses. White-throated sparrows are winter birds. They come in two forms. This one there's a white form and a tan form. I hope you can see this with the head. These pictures, I think, I'm not sure what's wrong. They seem to be a little high up in my screen. I hope they aren't. They're more visible on yours. There may be a way to make that screen smaller. But the white form and the tan form, they can be either male or female. They can be young birds. They can be older birds. There's no apparent reason why one would be white and one would be tan. The bright white ones have a bright white stripe with yellow lores. It becomes quite striking as spring approaches and they start to get some fresh plumage. But they have, whatever color they are, they have a clearly delineated white throat, which is where they get their name from. This is a small sparrow. Here's the brown form, does not have that white line across the eye, and its dark stripes are more like a dark brown, but it still has that white throat. So they're not different birds. They're the same bird, just two different forms. This is another sparrow. It doesn't really look much like a sparrow, but it is. If you see the babies in the springtime, which you can only see if you go up to places like Newfoundland or the boreal forest, they look very stripy like sparrows. But when they grow up, the dad looks like this. They used to be called, well, they're part of a larger group of juncos called slate-colored juncos, so dark-eyed juncos. The male is very slate gray with a pink beak. And the female, which sometimes looks like a different bird depending on how much striping she's got in the back, is a brown color. And sometimes there's a little bit of sort of a rusty reddish in there too, but they're both the same species of bird, just male and female. My sister always says they look like they just put on a sweater that had shrunk. So that's the impression she has of them. So that's why I've got the shrunken sweater effect there. This is a bird that's around all year too. This is a song sparrow. This is a heavily streaked sparrow. It has, the streaks tend to come together in a much larger dark mark in the middle of the breast. Sometimes this looks really very discreet. No, not that one. Looks very discreet, but it is, it's actually composed of separate stripes that have come together into a big spot. Brown stripes on the head. There are other sparrows that look like this one, but you won't find them at your feeders at winter, so we'll save them for the summer and fall series of IDs. This bird is around year-round. It often hangs out with the juncos and the white-throated sparrows in winter, forming small mixed flocks of sparrows. And this is a sparrow that typically you'll find more in fields. In the winter, if you are living near one of the grasslands, you might be more likely to have this come to your feeders. If you're living right in the middle of the forest, like I am, this will only probably turn up at your feeders after a heavy snowstorm. It's the American or northern tree sparrow. This is another boreal bird. It has this rusty cap. This one has three things to look for: a rusty cap, a two-toned bill. So the top is black, the bottom is yellow. And it has this distinctive tie tack or stick pin spot right in the middle of a clear breast. This sparrow is slightly smaller than the ones we looked at before. So look for those in a snowstorm. We had them last year, I know, and I think the year before. So it's possible to have them. Not common, but it is possible to see them, even in the woods. Now towhees we have. This is a bird that we have all year round. This is the male. The female looks like this. The old name for them was chestnut-sided because they have big chestnut patches on the side. And I had one of these females the last time. This is another one that typically will be rummaging around in the leaf litter around the edges of the woods and things most of the time, even in the winter. But during a snowstorm or an ice storm and there's snow on the ground and it's really hard to find stuff underneath, they will come to your feeders. But they mostly will continue to rummage around on the ground underneath the feeder. And I had I forgot, I was going to try and get my picture of the one I had under my feeder about 3 weeks ago, the second to last snowstorm this one turned up. And she was there for several days until the snow melted, and then she went back into the edges of the woods again. So they really do look kind of like the male, but the only thing you might mistake this for is maybe a robin, because they do have, but the chestnut part is only on the sides of this bird. And here's another sparrow, the white-crowned sparrow. This is a big sparrow. You will notice this one if you see it because it's noticeably larger than the other one. The only bird it could possibly have, well, it has the white stripes with alternating white and black stripes right on the top of the head, a clear breast, no markings, no streaks. The only thing you might mistake it for, or mistake this bird for that one, is the white form of a white-throated sparrow, which also has the white stripes, but it has the white crown does not have yellow lores. It does not have a distinct delineated white throat like the white-throated sparrow, and it is significantly larger with no streaking. The white-throateds have a little bit of light streaking on the breast. This does not turn up very often. I have had it here in my yard in the woods in the Sourlands, and I've seen it elsewhere in grasslands. I'm willing to bet that if you're living along Cider Mill Road across from the Cider Mill grasslands, where I often hear and see those birds and these birds in the winter, I bet those are going to some of those feeders too, because they tend to hang out in the hedgerow that's right. Oh, that happened all by itself. I didn't touch a thing. In the hedgerows right across the street, literally from where the houses are. So I bet people have seen them there. This is another lovely bird. This one often doesn't turn up at feeders until late in the season. They've probably started to exhaust some of their food sources. This is another one that likes fields, in particular open fields, or the edges of woodlands. They don't typically spend a lot of time in people's yards. But if there's a snowstorm, especially a late season storm, they can start to appear in your backyard under your feeder, and they're gray on the back and very heavily streaked in a deep rusty brown color. You're going to notice them for sure. They're also a bit larger than some of the other sparrows I mentioned before, smaller than the white crown, but definitely bigger than things like the white throat. And this is one that I took. We have a patio with old brick, and you can see how well this bird just blends right in with the color of that brick behind it. Very pretty bird. We get them here in New Jersey every year, but you don't necessarily see them unless conditions are right at your feeders, but they will come to feeders. And of course, this is a bird I'm very pleased to say I do not have on my yard list. This is a house sparrow. Most of them in the winter look like the female on the left here. This is the male in breeding plumage he has a bit of a black bib. House sparrow is not a sparrow. It's actually a member of the weaver finch family, and the weaver finches are not finches either. So this poor bird is all mixed up, but it's been very, very successful in colonizing the entire world, everywhere except Antarctica, from what I understand. And if you live in a city or even a town, if you live on a farm, you could potentially have these birds coming to your feeders. I remember one time I was looking for warblers in the springtime. We were at Bull Island, which was well, still is pretty much a great spot to find warblers. And our eyes fell upon this little bird on the ground, and we're all looking at it going, what is that? And somebody said, oh my God, it's a house sparrow. What do you know? We were not expecting to see it. None of us had house sparrows in our yards. And we're thinking, what on earth is that bird? But that's what it is. So they could be at your feeders too. Let's look at some real finches. These are actual finches. This is a winter goldfinch. It is a far cry from the bright yellow, neon yellow and black males that you see in the summer. It's much drabber, but it has very noticeable wing bars. Look at the wing bars on this, and you will see these bars on that bird when you're looking at them in the winter. Very distinctive. And these are pine siskins. These are one of those eruptive finches. They're also finch. They come down in the winter, and when they do come down because of lack of food in the north, they will often hang out with goldfinches. So they're streaked all over. The goldfinch has no streaks. The pine siskins are all streaky, and they have little yellow spots on their wings. I don't believe I have seen any this winter, but every so often they do turn up. Just before Hurricane Sandy was our last huge eruption, and I had at least 100 in my yard. They were all over the feeders, they were all over the deck, they were all over everywhere. They stayed around for one day after Hurricane Sandy, ate a whole pile of food. They will literally clear out the feeder, and then they flew away. I think they thought the neighborhood was getting too wild. They're very feisty. They fight each other. They fight with the goldfinches. They're constantly posturing and flaring out their wings. They're very cute little things. And here is a goldfinch surrounded by pine siskins. So you can see the difference here. The goldfinch is bigger, it's clearer, has these bright wing bars. The pine siskins are streaky, and they have this yellow area and the yellow feathers, shafts of feathers, a little bit sometimes yellow in the wing bars that the goldfinch does not have. So you can easily tell them apart. So these are house finches versus purple finches. The house finch males and the purple finch males. In these pictures, I deliberately chose these pictures because it shows like a very bright house finch. And house finches tend to be more orangey than the purple finches. And the purple finches, they say that they look like they are a bird that has been dipped in raspberry juice, but the problem here is that these birds vary tremendously in the amount of color they have. So some house finches are very pale, and so are some purple finches. However, there is a trick to knowing one from the other, and even some, intermediate birders have trouble telling a purple finch from a house finch when they see them together. The house finch always has brown. In this area, the wing coverts here, right here, this area here, and up onto the back is always brown. And the same area in the purple finch always has some of that purple or red color in it. The females are a little bit more difficult. The females are streaky. The female house finch has thin streaks. The female purple finch has thicker streaks and a very prominent white eyebrow. Also has a white stripe, but usually a little bit less prominent underneath the eye. So that's how you can tell a purple finch female from the house finch female. That's also something people have trouble with. And like I'm saying, there are a lot of these around right now. I have piles of these. The juvenile purple finches tend to look more like their mother. So I'm seeing a few of the males and a whole lot of this female form plumage. Some of those could be juvenile males as well. They just haven't changed yet. And so here's house finch and purple finch. They do interact with each other, sitting side by side. Again, you can see the wings, the difference in the wings. That's two different birds from the ones we saw before. And here, you know how it is when you're trying to get all your family to look at the camera at the same time. It's kind of hard to get birds to turn around and look at the same time, even worse actually. So this is the house finch in the back. Streaky, thin streaks with no markings going on in the head. And here's the female purple finch with that big white eyebrow. This is a problem that occurs periodically. It's kind of cyclical. There was a big outbreak of what was called at the time Finch Eye Disease. Now people are simply referring to it as Finch Eye Disease because it occurs in all the species of finches I mentioned. The first sign is often feathers sticking up around the eyes of the bird. Eventually, the eyes become very swollen and in some cases shut completely, and the bird can't see out of one and sometimes out of both eyes. So this is a purple finch that has that disease. Let's find out a little bit more about this. Oh, I should mention the bird can be cured if it's captured and brought to a place like Mercer County Wildlife Center, but many birds do recover spontaneously. This Finch Eye disease was first identified in house finches in the DC area in 1994, and about half the population died when this first entered the finch population. It's caused by a bacterium called Mycoplasma gallisepticum, which is a bacteria known to occur in poultry. If you've ever been to south of DC, Baltimore area, southern area of Baltimore, that whole area has many poultry farms, and they're mostly factory farms. And undoubtedly, these birds picked it up, these finches picked it up from these poultry farms in that area. But now it's endemic in the population in finches. Question is, do bird feeders play a role in the spread of this? And they could. But finches are gregarious. You find all these finches mixed together, sitting in trees. I've watched finches with this eye disease rubbing their eyes, trying to relieve the itching and the burning and the pain that they must have when this bacterium infects their eyes. Just sitting on a branch and rubbing and moving and rubbing. So once it's in the population, it spreads very easily throughout all the finches. My own experience is what they usually tell you to do. If you go and look in the websites, it tells you to remove your feeders and have the birds disperse. You take the feeders away for a couple of days. So I thought about that and then disinfect them and put them back up. But I was observing these birds at my feeders. They were going from a branch a few feet away and then back to the feeder. That was about, they were so, this goldfinch here can't see out of either eye. Usually if they have it in one eye, they will put their good eye to the outside so they can watch for predators and the bad eye towards the feeder. This bird, both of this bird's eyes were almost completely swollen shut. And the bird also looks very thin. So this bird was not finding a lot of food to eat. But these birds were going from a branch nearby to the feeder. I went out and tried to capture them to bring them to the wildlife center. I failed. By the way, if you want to do that, a butterfly net works very well if you want to try and capture a small sick bird. But they would just fly a few feet to a branch and stay there and come right back to the feeder again after I left. So I figured if I took those bird feeders away from those birds were probably going to die of starvation because they couldn't see well enough to forage normally. So I chose to leave my bird feeders up, and I did not find a mass of dead birds in my yard at all. I think, from what I could tell, most of them actually did recover. And I think being able to have food close at hand where they knew where to find it played a role in that recovery. So this is, that's a controversial subject. But I'll tell you in a little while, I'll tell you about a better type of feeder to have that will help prevent spread. This is another finch, common redpoll, turns up every so often. I've never had it in my yard. I used to get them when I lived up in Canada. They would come frequently down from the north in the winter. If you ever see one at your feeder, call me. I want to see it. And I want to put it on my New Jersey list. But they're very distinctive. They have greater or lesser amounts of red in the rest of their feathers, but all of them have this big red round spot, or also known as the poll, on the front of their head. So this bird has almost no color in the feathers, but you can still see that nice red spot on the front of the head. Here's another type of bird, the accipiters, which are bird feeder specialists. And they don't come to eat the seed, they come to eat the birds that are eating the seed. You're most likely to see a Cooper's hawk. They are the real specialists. But you could also have a sharp-shinned hawk. They look very, very similar. There is a difference in size. The Cooper's is larger. The Sharpie is smaller. Cooper's about the size of a crow, and the Sharpie's about the size of a dove or maybe a blue jay. But if you look at the females are larger than males. That's true of most raptor species. But so if you look at the male of Cooper's, which is about 15 inches long, and the female of a Sharpie species, which is 14 inches long, you can see that's really, if you saw those two birds together, maybe you could tell the difference, but you couldn't tell the difference if you didn't really see them side by side. And again, size is very deceptive, especially at a distance. So the best thing to do, these birds are generally pretty recognizable as accipiters because they tend to have long, slim bodies with long tails. A lot of other hawks have short tails, and they both species, it's not visible in this photograph, but both species have barring on the tail. If you're not sure what it is and you're going to report it, the best thing to do is call it an accipiter, and that is also a category on many of these databases where you put the birds in, because a lot of people have trouble telling the difference between the two of these. They also look different at different stages in their development, which makes it even more complicated. And yes, they will eat birds at your feeder. You know you've had one of these come through if you find a big pile of feathers on the ground, because they pluck the birds that they catch very, very thoroughly before they eat them. Everybody probably knows what a crow is, but I put this up because my mother, when I was growing up in a city, used to call these birds crows. And they're not crows, they're grackles. They're much smaller than actual crow. In the summertime in particular, the males get very, very shiny and iridescent. But at any time of year, they always have yellow eyes. So that's how you tell. Just in case you're a little confused, grackles have the yellow eyes. They typically come and to eat suet. They don't come that often here in the Sourlands. I think you see them more often in a city environment at feeders, but they do show up sometimes in large numbers. Big roaming flocks come through in the winter, and if they're going to go to the feeders, they will usually go to the suet feeder. This is another bird, two types of birds actually. European starlings, the introduced species, as the name suggests, which I rarely see in my yard, but when I do see them, it's again during a snowstorm, and sometimes it's easy to mix them up with this bird here, which is the juvenile male Redwing Blackbird. And when you see them in a feeder through a snowstorm, they could look kind of similar, but you can tell this bird has this yellow bar in the wing here, which will eventually have a lot more red associated with it, and it will become glossy black like its father. These two are both two views of the female Redwing Blackbird, which really doesn't look at all like either the male or the juvenile. It looks a lot like a sparrow, or like one of those finches. It even has the white eyebrow. However, it's much larger than a sparrow is. Also, that's the throat over here, if you can see that, often has a yellowy orange cast to it. And the late Pete Basinski used to say this was the bird people asked him about most often. They had the most difficulty identifying it. So get to know if you see this. And this picture actually was taken 2 weeks ago under my feeder. This bird turned up again after one of those snowstorms that we had when the ground was covered with snow, and it went for the fast food on that day. They don't even live in the woods normally. They normally winter in marshes. We do have some marshy areas near us in the Sourlands. They might be there, but otherwise I don't know where it came from. And then finally, the wild turkey. If you have a flock of these come through, they could clear up. They will sometimes come to feeders, and you will not miss them. They travel in large flocks, at least 15 birds in the winter, and they make a lot of noise. Okay, oh, good. Less than an hour, we're getting towards the end here, of the identification part. So a great resource to learn more about identifying birds and everything else concerning birds is Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It says it all here, all about birds. You can get a great app for your phone, the Merlin Bird ID app, which now can help you identify birds that you see, birds that you've taken a picture of, and birds that you've heard. It can record and analyze bird calls. In every case, Merlin says that you should take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, and don't, because all of this technology is still quite new. There was somebody who reported on a bird site this past summer that she was at the shore recording calls of gulls, and there was a child next to her on the beach that started screaming, and Merlin identified it as a screech owl. So just be careful, and just try and see the bird. If Merlin gives you a call ID in particular, try and see that bird, because I've had some pretty weird things that it identified. Clearly was not identifying correctly. But you know, the old joke among birders is that novice birders find more rare species than experienced birders do, and that's of course because they're misidentifying common birds. So feed them and they will come. Very brief on the feeding. This is a winter snowstorm. There are at least 6 or 7 different species of birds in and around the feeders. So this is a great time to see birds. All kinds of interesting things will come during a snowstorm. So as far as feeders go, I will give you some more information on where to find out more information about that. But this is my favorite feeder. This one is called the Yankee Dipper, I'm sorry. Because these, if a bird larger than say a jay or tries to, or a squirrel, it's spring loaded, it will fall down and drop that bird off. It will definitely, it's the most squirrel proof bird feeder I've ever had. It is long, it's about 2 feet long in total. It's got solid metal at each end, and it's the tube is made of hard Lexan type polycarbonate plastic. The squirrels can try to hang from the bottom and get their little paws into the port, but there's only 4 ports. They're all at the bottom and it can't reach. It will just fall right off, and I've seen that happen. It's very amusing. These dents in the side happened when it was mauled by a black bear that attempted to get into the tube and failed, and the tube is still intact. This feeder is about 50 or maybe even, I think, closer to 20 years old. We're still using it. Here on the top, all these little marks are squirrel teeth marks where they tried to chew their way in through the top, and that didn't work either. This is the most squirrel-proof bird feeder we have, as long as you keep it high enough up off the ground. Did have one squirrel once that was able to jump from a rock, hook one toe into this little part of the tube and use the other paw to scoop seed out, but only one squirrel has ever learned how to do that in 20 years, so I think you're safe. Going to save a lot. They're about $100. You should be able to get one for around that price. Chewy.com had them on sale, but it's absolutely worth it. They're durable. They'll stand up to a bear. How many bird feeders can say that? I've watched bears rip bird feeders apart, and they're squirrel proof, so you'll save a lot of money in seed. The other thing about this too is, if we're talking about spreading bird diseases at bird feeders, is that the birds have to take the seeds out one at a time. So they can't walk around in it, they can't poop in it. It really keeps the seeds cleaner, keeps them drier. You can put a lot of seeds in at once, and the seeds will stay perfectly dry. They won't go moldy. So it's got a lot going for it. And most of our feeders are this type of feeder now, except for hummingbird feeders. This is a type of feeder that a lot of people have. I have a problem with this type of feeder because of this opening here where the hopper lets the seed come out into either a little trough like here or into a tray. Because I had one of those, and there are birds that can get inside the hopper, mostly house finches. You wouldn't think there was enough room, but I bet a determined house finch could get in there. And after 4 times of having to rescue house finches from my hopper feeder, I just finally threw it away because it was just too much trouble. But the other problem here is that there are trays where the birds can walk. This one has a little grid, so some of the used or chewed over food will fall into the tray, but there are birds with beaks that are long enough to get down into that tray, and birds will poop on their food. You'll see poop all over some of these bird feeders, so that's not good either. That can spread things like salmonella. We haven't had a problem in the east, but that has been a problem among some western birds. So a tray where the birds can't walk in the food, can't poop in the food, where the food stays dry so it doesn't get moldy, that's your best choice. That will cause you the fewest problems. It's worth paying a few dollars more for a really good bird feeder like the one I showed you before. But if you want to know what to feed them, black oil sunflower seeds, hand down, are the best. Suet, which is made from animal fat, although you can get recipes to make it with peanut butter too. But if you're using animal fat, make sure it's rendered block. Rendered fat is boiled. The chemical composition of the fat is changed so that it doesn't melt when it gets warm. And this is important that you use rendered fat and not raw fat. Don't be tempted to throw the fat you cut off your meat out for the birds, because that can get all over the bird's feathers, especially if it starts to melt, if the temperature rises. The birds have a very hard time getting it off their feathers. And if they try to feed it to their babies are going to be covered in fat, and that attracts insects, and that could lead to the death of the baby. So get the proper rendered fat. You want some small seed for sparrows and doves. Rosedale Mills, they're branded. The Rosedale Mills brand mixed seed is very good. We add extra black oil sunflower seeds to that, but this is what the sparrows and particularly the doves prefer to eat. Peanuts in the shell are great for a bunch of birds. Just make sure they're not salted. And I only ever put out Niger seed or thistle seed when we have an eruption of pine siskins, because nobody else seems to like it. The pine siskins love it. They will just chow down on that. But the goldfinches seem to be not too interested in it. Occasionally you'll get a junco that will eat it, but I wouldn't bother unless we've got a pine siskin eruption. Then rush to the store and buy some Niger seed. And everybody bird will be your best friend if you feed them mealworms, particularly the insect eaters. But that's very expensive, especially if you're buying live mealworms. So you can buy them freeze-dried too. But if you want to find out more about what to feed birds, my friends at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, the All About Birds, has a whole area on what to feed birds and what to feed what specific birds. You can learn a lot there, and about a lot of other things as well. Okay, so what do you do now that you can identify at least 40 species of birds? You can think about participating in the Great Backyard Bird Count. That's next weekend, I think the weekend after this coming weekend, February 18th to, I think that's supposed to be the 21st. 18, yes, that should be the 21st. I'm sorry. So it's from Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. So that's the President's holiday weekend, basically. You can go out anytime during that time for at least 15 minutes. Doesn't have to be in your backyard, can be. You can go to a nearby park. You can actually, wherever you happen to be, if you're visiting your grandmother in Vermont, you can do it there too, because this is all across North America, and other countries around the world are also contributing data. Go to find out how to participate at birdcount.org. And you can, if just remembering that is all you really need, and find out how to participate. And they have this great free webinar, which will give you some more ID tips and some more tips on how to participate in the Great Backyard Bird Count, happening on February 16th. So you can sign up for that. And it costs you nothing. I would highly recommend that you do that before you participate for the first time. And I hope you do participate, because you are contributing to a vast database. This gets bigger and bigger every year. And I was just talking to Beverly before we got on here about the problem that we're having with ash trees in the Sourlands. And data like this, just now that we're really beginning to see the canopy starting to disintegrate, having this data about birds, particularly in the winter, but all year round really, and following the change in the populations of these birds. Are they going to, some may increase, some will decrease for sure. I think birds that need large contiguous areas like the pileated woodpeckers, even hairy woodpeckers, we have a lot of them in the Sourlands because we have a lot of contiguous woodlands. We're going to see changes in those populations of birds, and you will be contributing important data by adding your bird counts, and then continuing to do that in future years. So tonight I am unveiling the new group, the Sourland Birders, and we have a special email account, sourlandbirding@gmail.com. This is a group that, well, the main purpose for this group is going to be to bird the heck out of the sourlands, particularly, as I just mentioned, we've got this problem with the ash borers and the death of ash trees. We can have a great chance to document how that's going to change bird populations in all seasons, migratory birds, resident birds, by collecting data throughout the sourlands. As you know, Washington Crossing Audubon, or you may know, Washington Crossing Audubon is partnering with the Sourland Conservancy to train bird monitors to monitor places where the Sourland Conservancy is planting trees and herbaceous plants, and in some cases putting in deer exclosures. So we're looking for people who can monitor those, recognize the birds, and just keep track of them on a regular basis. And so some of you have already joined that group. We had a sort of an initial event at the Feluciac property in Montgomery, where we had a bunch of, if you have already signed up for that at that time, then I already have your email, and I will be sending you an email from this about more details about the Sourland birders. So we're going to be having more training events. We're going to do more, there'll be more in the field birding events that you can come on to hone your skills. We already have a nice group of experienced birders and brand new, never before birders who are there to learn. And with this kind of a group, we can start forming teams with experienced birders who will help the beginner birders, and everybody can be part of this effort, and it's going to be a very important one. So, and also if you have any questions about tonight's presentation or any questions about birds at all, you can use this, you can send that to me at this Gmail address, and I will be sure to answer it for you. Now, whoops, if you just need to get out for a walk, we just have a newly announced walk. We're going to have a beginner bird walk on February the 19th. That's led by Mark Manning, who's on the board of Washington Crossing Audubon, and he lives down in the Hamilton area and does a lot of birding in Veterans Park. It's not the Sourlands, but they have a lot of birds there, even though it's more of an urban area. And it's a great way to get some hands-on experience, or should I say eyes-on experience, out in the field. This walk is free, but you have to pre-register, and you can do that at www.signupgenius.com/go/winterfieldtrips22, and you will find a slot there where you can put in your information, and you will get a confirmation email, and you'll also get an email later on if the trip is a go or not. If something happens, the weather turns or something, will let you know whether or not the trip is going to be a go a day or two beforehand. This is a family-friendly event, but kids under 16 must be accompanied by a parent. And this is a great way to get your kids involved too. And Mark is very good with beginner birders, very patient, a good person to be a beginner and on a bird walk with. And that's the end. Went a little bit over, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you have now. And I guess I should stop my screen sharing now. Let's try that. Okay. Ooh, I can see everybody. Wow.
Yeah, oh, that's great. That was an amazing amount of information. Thank you so much. My husband has joined me here at the screen. Thank you so much. I'm sure that you took most of those pictures yourself, right,
Yes.
Juanita?
Mm-hmm. Yes, most of those are mine.
Wow.
Except for the sparrows.
Those are amazing shots. I know there's a couple of questions in the chat bar. There's a question about Suet. There's a question about sharing the pictures, and I think you can read those yourself, Juanita.
Okay, let's have a look here. Okay, let's start at the beginning, I guess, up here. Okay. I have to read this. This is from Andrea Bennett. She's put in this, some of you may have read this. When I was a child in Northern California in the 50s, my mother was a bird watcher and a feeder. But being a Victorian lady, could not bring herself to say titmouse, so she called her birds a twitmouse. Okay, so there's a question here. Does anyone find that suet blocks purchased from bird stores are higher quality and attract more variety of birds? And the answer is no. Fat is fat. That's what they're after. You can get all kinds of fancy stuff in your suet. They often add seeds to it. You can also find some that has capsaicin, which is the stuff that's found in hot peppers, added to the suet, which is supposed to deter squirrels from eating it. In my yard, the birds don't like it very much either. So if you want some good quality suet, there's an Audubon branded suet that you can get from Lowe's Hardware of all places. I think that I usually pay like 92, 95 cents a cake for it, just the plain suet. That's all you need. And especially the insect eaters will love you for it. It's after sunflower seeds, it's the most popular food. And we have a lot of woodpeckers here in the woods, so I have at least 3 or 4 pairs of downy woodpeckers and 2 or 3 pairs of hairy woodpeckers, and so we go through a lot of suet at our house, plus all the other woodpeckers, the red-bellied woodpeckers. And okay, oh yes, the pictures do look good. Side size, what is the best way to distinguish Coopers and sharp-shinned? Well, that's a hard one. The sharp-shinned hawks have skinnier legs than the Coopers. Everything is like, this is more, this is less. The Cooper's hawk head is a little bit darker than the Sharpie. You can actually, what I would do is go to the Cornell lab site and Google or search for sharp-shinned hawk versus Cooper's hawk. And they will give you a whole long list of what to look for. And after you've read that and studied it very carefully, and you go out and look at these birds, you're still going to have a hard time identifying them. But again, looking at the real bird, especially with somebody who knows what it is, and just memorizing it and imprinting it into your brain is the best way to do it for any kind of bird, really. So as the head shape is a little bit different. I actually have a poster. Getting a little bit late now. I don't want to keep you too much longer. I'd get it for you that you can actually get a poster from, I think this one maybe might have come from Audubon, that shows the 2 birds side by side and it has a little mark showing you where they differ. So it's just a matter of, keeping at it until you get it. But until you get it, just report them as exhibitors. Copy of the deck. The deck that you used. What deck? I'm sorry, I don't quite understand that question.
The PowerPoint, I think.
The PowerPoint deck.
Your slides.
My slides. Oh yes, this is good. Yes, well, this will be recorded. I guess I could send you. That if you wanted that. I can make that available.
Check our website, the Sourland.org website, in a couple days, and we'll see what we can organize with Juanita.
Okay, sounds good.
Great, thank you.
Okay, do I have my question about my camera? I have a camera that's used. I fairly recently in life became a bird photographer. I was really determined not to be a bird photographer because actually it does interfere with birding. While you're trying to focus on a bird, you're missing 6 other birds that flew by you but you didn't see. And so I really tried not to do that for a while, but now I'm hooked. So because it really is nice to have those pictures afterwards, or to get a picture of something you can't identify and look at it later. So the camera I use is a Canon SX50, I believe. Just a second, I'll get it, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it. I'll show it to you. Just a minute.
It's only got 1 lens. It's a wide angle. It's 2. I need to get some more lenses for it.
Okay, here it is. Sorry for being away so long, but this is not one of those big cameras with a huge lens. So it's really small and light and easy to carry around. I recently went on a birding tour of Colombia this past summer, and our guide, who's an excellent professional guide, said he used to use a camera like this for many years. So this is a Power Shot SX50 HS. They make a newer version of this, which so that's how far out it zooms. It zooms out a little bit further. It's an SX70. That would be a good camera. So this is a great birding camera to start off with, and it's easy to carry around. Okay, and I do get some. I've gotten some really good shots. It's always fun to get a better shot than your guide does, and the guide has the big camera with the huge lens and everything, and your picture looks better. Very satisfying. Okay, let's see. How big does the American crow usually get? Well, it's one of the largest birds. The only bird that's black like that and is bigger is a raven, which is huge. Crows are very large. I'm trying to think of maybe about this big. Get about this big. So they can get pretty big. Have bluebird boxes, but they get ruined by other birds. This is a very common thing. There's something you can get called a predator guard that you can put around the hole, the opening to the bluebird box. And this will keep squirrels from chewing open the hole and making it larger. They'll keep other birds like woodpeckers, who also use cavity nests, from pecking it open. It will also keep some birds from going in, like cowbirds, for example. They don't like to stick their heads apparently too far into a hole, and so they will. So it will actually keep certain types of birds out. The other thing that's important with the bluebird box is to monitor them for things like house sparrows, which will get in there and build nests in a bluebird box if they get a chance. You should, if you can't, remove the nests. You're allowed to do that under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, because they are not native birds. So you can remove sparrows if you wish. And you can remove sparrow eggs if you wish. You can't remove other birds' eggs that are native to the Americas, but you can remove these invaders' eggs. So you can also use predator guards, because sometimes snakes can get into the box. I think the black snakes that enjoy eating birds and eggs. So you can put a predator guard around the bottom. It looks kind of like the kind of cone you put on a dog's head after they come back from the vets, only it goes around the pole as you've got your birdhouse mounted on. But that's, this is a really difficult problem. Important to consistently keep your feeder stock. That's a good question. The answer is no. If you want to see birds, keep the food there, but the birds will not die if you don't feed them. If they're healthy birds, they're not going to die. They'll just go somewhere else. Birds naturally forage widely through the woods, and wherever they happen to be. They actually cover quite a large area every day. And they will, of course, keep coming back to your feeder, but they won't. That's not the only place they're going to feed. So if you have to go away on vacation and your feeders are going to be without food, you're not going to come back to a yard full of dead birds. Don't worry. They will find another place to eat. It just may take them a while to find you again, though, afterwards. So that's the only problem if you stop feeding them for a while, is they'll take you off their daily route for foraging. So it might take them a while come back. I saw the Droll Yankee, $25 at the Birdwatchers General Store. That's a window feeder. Yes, the Droll Yankee feeders are generally very good quality. That's a fun thing to have a window feeder with a one-way mirror, so the birds just see themselves in the mirror. You can actually look at them, and it's like they have in those interrogation rooms on police shows, where you can look through see the suspect being questioned. Well, in this case, you can see the birds. That's a fun thing to have. I used to have one of those. Oh, Talking Birds. Yeah, that's a good podcast. Okay. Oh, I see there's my sister Angela, looks like. Would I likely find a feeder useful? So on the top, I'm on the top of a 4-story apartment building near woods. Would I likely find a feeder useful on my balcony? Well, I would say it's definitely worth a try. A couple of Christmases ago, I gave my son, who lives in Queens, New York, a bird feeder. He's on the 4th. He's actually on a 4th floor balcony in an urban area, but he's right near the Hudson River. So he does see some interesting birds there. And he has a cat that enjoys watching birds. So I got him this feeder to put in the window, mainly as a sort of an amusement for the cat. I gave him some bird seed, and he's got birds. He sent me a picture the other day, had a half a dozen birds. They were all house sparrows, of course, but that's fine. The cat enjoyed them very much. And so did he, actually. So yeah, you can give it a try. If you're near woods, you might get some more interesting birds. You might get some finches. It might take them a little while to find you because they won't necessarily be looking for it. But another time, another bird in a balcony, I was at a hotel in Vancouver, and there was a gull that landed on the balcony. Clearly somebody had been feeding this gull. This must have been the 10th floor, but somehow this gull figured out that people would give it food if it sat there and looked pathetic. So I think I fed it some Cheetos or something that kids snacks. The kids had some snacks. So I'd say give it a try. Give it a few weeks. Don't be too impatient, and you might very well get something interesting. Let me know if you do. Okay, I think, did I get everything?
Yeah, I think that might be the end of our questions, and you have kept going for an hour and a half here, so thank you so much.
My pleasure.
A lot of questions and provided a ton of wonderful information. And the talk by Juanita tonight was recorded, and it will be available through our website. Just look on sourland.org and a day or two, and you'll see it there, and you can watch it again, and you can refer to your friends.
Yes, that's why I felt comfortable about about talking so fast, because I knew you could go back and review it.
Exactly. Well, one of the things I said before we got going was I think it's interesting that the word bird is also now a verb. Mm-hmm. And it's an action word now, and I think yes, we're all more equipped to take action in watching and recording and photographing all the birds in the Sourland. So thank you so much. That was just wonderful tonight.
Thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for being interested in our birds.
Thank you from the Sourland Conservancy and from Washington Crossing Audubon. And keep a watch on both of our websites for future programming. And we will say good night.
Night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Check out our YouTube channel for the recording. Thank you.